Okay, so we're going to create a roof framing plan. So we're going to go over to your project browser over here, and we're going to go to the roof framing level. Okay, when you open your roof framing level, it's going to look like this. And right now, if you have columns in, those columns should be showing up. And in my case, I have a lowered section of roof in the back, so it's showing that, and it's showing some stairs, and it's showing some curtain walls that I put in here. I don't want those to show on my roof framing plan. For whatever reason they showed up, so I can hide in the view that category. So I got rid of those things that I didn't want, and this is a beam I've stuck in here that I'll probably just get rid of that one. Okay, so to start with, your roof framing plan should just show the grid lines and your columns that should show up. Make sure that you're set to fine detail down here. If you were at coarse detail, that's just going to look like that. It's not going to look like much, so change it to fine detail so you can actually see your columns. Now, when we put these columns in, we did put in W10 by 49 columns, and whenever you put columns in, you want to make sure you're putting in columns that are roughly square or equidimensional height, width and depth, right? So that's why these are roughly square. Versus beams, you want them to be taller and thinner. Columns, you want to be roughly square. Okay, so we're going to put in the perimeter beam around this building, and first off, I want to create a level for the beams to come in at. So let's go to an elevation view. I'm going to go to my front elevation probably, and I have already put in a level here that I want you to add, which is top of steel at 12 feet. Okay, so when you put in a level, you just go to the architectural section and you go over here to level, and then draw one in and set the height of it to be 12 foot high. Typically when I put that in, I'm just going to put one in here. If I went to this and I just went here, and I wouldn't be concerned about where it is until I set it. It's going to default to a name that you would then change to top of steel, and then you would change the height to 12 foot. Okay, I already have one, so I'll just delete that one. Okay, so we want to make sure we have a level in that is the top of our steel beams. Okay. Then we'll go back to our roof framing plan. And in some cases, we have beams that are going to be attaching to the flanges of the columns, and in some cases, we'll have steel beams that are going to attach to the webs of the columns. Okay, so first off, I'm going to put one in right here that attaches between grid line 1 and 2, between this column and this column on grid line A. And so I'm going to go to structural, at the top, beams, and when you go to beams, is the W12 by 26 in your program? It's already in there, right? Okay, so we'll pick that one, and then you'll notice here that its reference level is defaulted to level 1. Okay, and if we click there, we have now top of steel level. We click on top of steel. I don't necessarily know that it's going to end up on top of steel, but I hope it will. But if it doesn't, we can also adjust it. Okay, so, and then it says the Z direction is justified to the top of the beam. Z is always vertical. X and Y are horizontal and depth-wise, but Z is always vertical, so we're going to the top of the beam. And if we go down a little bit farther, it tells us a starting extension and ending extension. Okay. In structural steel, the connection between a column and a beam is a ½ inch away. They don't go flush. Okay? They leave a ½ inch between them, and then they connect them with angle irons. So they're not meant to touch each other because that would be too tolerant strict. So they leave a gap there of ½ inch on each end. So that's why it defaulted to a ½ inch here. So I'm just going to put one in here, and if I click on this grid line, and if I go to this grid line, you might say that it's going to be a ½ inch away, but it's a ½ inch away from the flange, right? Okay. So that isn't what I want. I wanted a ½ inch away from that point. So I'm going to just go here, and maybe I can put a dimension on from end of that beam to that flange. And that distance is 5 11/32 inches, and I want that to be a ½ inch away from that. So what's a ½ inch less than 5 11/32? Well, let's go back to clicking on that beam, and this would be I drew that beam from 1 to 2, so this is the end of it. So the end offset, or the end extension, instead of being a minus a ½ inch, should be plus I'm just going to put in 5 inches for now. I should have mathematically calculated that, but you can see it pushed it over there, and now it's too far. It should have been, what, maybe put in 4.5, 4 1/4. So I put in 4 2/4, 4 1/4, and it should be a half, so it should be, I can't click on this and change this, it won't let me do that. So I'm going to have to click on this, and I'm going to have to make it 3/32 less. Okay, I'm not going to waste a bunch of time doing that, but we need to get that a ½ inch away. Okay, and we needed to get it a ½ inch away on either end. But rather than waste time on the video here, I'll let you solve that. So again, on the front end, I'd want to make that . So we'd want it to connect like that, but make sure that that's roughly a ½ inch on each side. Now I'm going to bring a column down between the other, or a beam, I mean, down between the other two columns here, going down grid line 1 between A and B. So again, I'll go back to my beam. Again, this time I do want the extensions to be minus ½ inch. So if I go from grid line grid line. I guess I should have went from beam to beam. Excuse me. For some reason it's not doing that for me, but it should have. That should have been a ½ inch away. Okay, and again I can modify those later. And let's go look at our building as an isometric for a second. And I'm going to so I hid all my walls. I just went and hid the category, and just so that I could look at it. It looks to me right now like it put them too high up in the building. So if I click on this beam, it put it at level roof for me for some reason. So I need to have the starting offset to be minus 8 inches off the roof, right? And the ending offset to be also minus 8. But to show you why they have a starting and an ending offset is that if I only do the starting offset, the beam sits at an angle. So if I click on that and change the ending offset to also minus 8. Okay. So now my beam was lowered. Let's go back and look at the section of this then. Make sure this goes far enough. Okay, so here's my my columns that are down 8 inches, so they're in line with that level that is my top steel. And the beam that was going between grid line A and B, that's still up at the roof level, and I haven't lowered that one. Now, before I talk about that, lowering that, is that going to be at the same level as the other beam? Is that going to be at level top of steel? Let's think about what's on top of the steel, the bar joists, right? So the bar joists are going to run from front to back on my building. So they're going to sit on top of that beam and be 2.5 inches taller, right? So when I get to the end of my building, I don't have a bar joist there, I have a beam there, right? Now I have the beam that's running on that edge of the building, and I want to raise that beam 2.5 inches so it's level with the top of the bar joist. So that decking comes across and sits on the beam, bar joist, bar joist, bar joist, right? So the beams that are on the end here then should be 2.5 inches taller. So if I go to the starting level of that beam should be, instead of a minus 8, it should be a minus 5.5, huh? So now the top of this beam that's running on the edge of my building is 2.5 inches taller than the beam that's supporting the bar joist. This one doesn't support any bar joist, it supports the decking. So the bar joist now will sit on top of this beam and be supported and be 2.5 inches taller than the beam, and the decking will run straight across. Okay. So let's go back to our roof framing plan. Now that I have this beam in here, and since all these grid line spacings are the same, I can copy that multiple times from grid line to grid line, grid line, grid line. Okay? And in this case, this beam is this grid line spacing is greater than these spacings, so I'm going to have to do some modifications there, but I can copy it from this grid line to this grid line, and we'll see that it's hanging over a little bit. I can click on that and drag it back to where I want it to be. Again, I'd want to modify and make sure that that's exactly a 1/2 inch. I guess an easy way to do that might be to drag it back farther than you want to, go to annotate, go to a detail line, draw a detail line down the edge of that flange, move that detail line 1/2 inch, and then drag the beam to it. Sometimes this doesn't snap right to it. And I can delete that. And now I could copy that beam multiple times from here to here. And then I mentioned the other day that the economy of structural steel framing is that you have as many beams the same size and same length as possible. So this is another example of drafting time. I can click those beams and copy them from grid line to grid line to grid line, right? Okay, so again, I can have this framework pretty well done here in short order by copying that one from. And I have my steel layout close to done. Okay, might be some modifications yet, but my building's fairly simple, so it worked out pretty well. Now I have a taller section in here where I'm going to have to raise some of those beams a little bit, right? Because I have a center section that's taller, and obviously these rows of beams are going to have to jump up to that next level. Okay, but in my example here, I guess you know, those, if I hit Control, those would all go up to level roof 2 and have a offset of 0 of -8. Oh. Okay, and they've moved up. Okay, So I'll let you work on that for a little bit, get your steel columns and beams in there. We'll talk about bar joists in a different, at a different time. So try to get your steel beams set, and we'll go from there.